taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We have got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to Globespan. This is a program platform brought to you by the Globespan 24x7 team, which consists of Mr. Mohar Singh, Devin, and Kumar. Beginning from earlier this year, January 15th, and continuing on to now, Globespan has created a platform that includes comments and opinions and appearances by personalities from all over the political and socio-cultural divide in Guyana. So far, Globespan's programs have been viewed by over 800,000 people from Guyana, US, Canada, UK, and other parts of the world. We request that you follow, like, and share our Facebook page and subscribe on YouTube. This evening's program concerns the role that civil society in particular can play in establishing a middle ground, particularly with regard to the current extremely contentious atmosphere that's going on. Today's panelists are, I think, no strangers to some of the people who follow this program. 40 years in Guyana. There's Mr. Troy Thomas, current president of Transparency Guyana, who has been a more recent but I think very clear voice on pronouncing on issues, particularly when it comes to public accountability. And there's Mr. Vishnu Doerga, who's also been, particularly as a representative of the business community, and also a young voice who has put his extremely lucid and clear opinions into the public domain. So, gentlemen, welcome, and I allow you each 3 minutes to introduce yourselves and what's your particular perspective on the topic at hand. How is it that civil society can help carve a middle ground? What's taking place here? We'll start with Mr. Lewis.
I really ask myself why you start with me, but since you've put me there, let me say to you that thanks very much, Ruel, and let me say from the outset that the Constitution of this country makes provision for inclusionary democracy. It speaks to the question of the people's involvement. And I get the impression that rather than agencies of civil society seeking to impose themselves in the process of making the Constitution real, is that on many occasions is that we seek to embrace what one political group may, the position one political group may advance or the other. In the context of what we are discussing here today, let me say to you that from a labor perspective, whatever we do is guided by what the march that started in 1926, when the trade union movement, when Critchlow and his colleagues in the Caribbean started to talk about 8-hour workday. 40-hour work week, universal adult suffrage, one man, one vote, the issue of universal health care, the issue of education for all, and prison reform. These were issues that the labor started to advance in 1926. The record is there. But what may well have happened is that in 1947, when operatives like Chedi Jagan came on board, and by 1950, Burnham was there, they joined the struggle. And when a mass-based political party was established, the PPP, first mass-based political party, is that labor declutched and allowed the politicians to run with it. I believe it's a fundamental error that was made at that time. Because today, as you speak, to get yourself involved in the activities that determine bread and butter issues, both sides accuse you of being political, when in fact they fail to understand that politics is from the cradle to the grave, because the politics determine where a woman will be, and if she can go to Balwan Singh Hospital or she can go to Georgetown Hospital to give birth, because the decision, the economic and political decisions, are made by a number of persons.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lincoln. There's some points that you made there that I'd like to return to, particularly the question of the reticence of labor in giving way to the political space. I'll repeat the question to Troy, and the same goes to Vishnu. I just want a 3-minute perspective on what you see personally and from your particular sector perspectives on the role of civil society in carving out a space, credible, accurate discourse against the background of what is an increasingly contentious political environment, an overwhelmingly political environment. So, Troy, and then Vishnu.
That's why colleague rightfully is in the Constitution contemplates the involvement of civil society in governance in general, and the role of civil society and the ordinary people in determining their own destiny. It's a situation wherein we're not supposed to or expected to hand everything over to the politicians and say, you do as you please. Having put them in office, we have a role to scrutinize their performance. We have a role to monitor, evaluate. We have a role to say, this direction that you're going down is not what you promised. We would like to have you deliver X, Y, or Z instead. Civil society is supposed to be that grouping of organizations that is capable of addressing the issues impartially, that the citizens can rely on them to provide those perspectives that are not marred by whatever might be the ills of our political atmosphere at the moment. Incidentally, in our society, it seems almost impossible to escape political labeling and suspicions of parroting political positions. My approach to that is to say that whatever the issue on the table, the politicians would have a view. For some, a certain view might be more convenient. As civil society, we have a duty to not shy away from it because it might appear that we might be somehow aligned. But if we continue to speak our truth, regardless of whoever else is saying that thing, we will emerge as independent eventually. So our role, I think, is rather important. We're not as strong as we should be as civil society in Guyana, and I would be the first to admit that there are several issues that affect us. But I do know, and I believe that there are some organizations, individuals in civil society in Guyana who've been doing good work, who would have the best interests of the people at heart, and I should take the opportunity to encourage them to continue to do the work that they're doing, because um, people look to us for that guidance. People understand, or at least know, what the political environment is like, and they look towards us for guidance, to interpret complex issues and to help them along. And it's a role that we take seriously at Transparency Institute Guyana Incorporated. And I just want to encourage my colleagues to continue doing what they're doing, but to strengthen it, look for the areas where they might have weaknesses and try to address those.
Okay. Let me just before I move on to Vishnu, I know the cut and thrust of saying what you have to say off the bat. You said that you will advise holding on and you will emerge as independent eventually. I think you meant that you will emerge as appearing independent eventually, because I suspect you coming from a perspective wherein you are in fact independent.
Yes, I guess what I mean is that people will realize what it is, because when sides change and when the element of convenience change, you see different views coming out. But if you say the course, people will learn to have that confidence in you.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Vishnu, please.
Yep. Thank you very much, and I love these particular discussions, because not only does it allow people like ourselves to express our opinions, it also provides a lot of education, maybe not just for the panelists, but everyone else who's viewing as well. Whenever I work with organizations, I always look for what's that guiding light. Where are we actually heading? What is the destination? And for Guyana, I usually see that guidance as our pledge. The thing that we tell ourselves back when we were in school. Probably we need to repeat it far more frequently. But it does say that I pledge myself to honor always the flag of Guyana and to be loyal to my country. And then it actually goes on to one of the key parts, to be obedient to the laws of Guyana. And I find that is such a critical one, because if we do not obey the laws, we very quickly end up in a situation where things can go horribly wrong. And same thing goes for an organization, same thing goes for a household. If in your house there are certain rules and the people in the household don't hold themselves to that rule, it's very quickly going to turn into a situation where everyone starts playing for themselves, and it can get very negative. It also says, to love my fellow citizens, and you only have to turn one eye to Facebook to see the amount of hate spewed to our fellow citizens, and that really bothers me, because at the end of the day, regardless who you vote for or which party you believe you belong to, you still have to live with each other, and to have all this racial hatred, especially, really spewed from one to the other, and then how can we build relations like that? How can we actually get to a place where we have mutual respect? And if we don't respect each other, do we expect anyone else to come into this country and respect us? That respect, earning respect, starts with us respecting ourselves and those closest to us. And then it further says, dedicate your energy towards the happiness and prosperity of Guyana. And, Mr. Lewis did start mentioning about the labor movement, and also the actions taken to ensure that they experience a level of happiness. from a private sector perspective, one of our goals is the prosperity angle. It is about bringing in capital, taking the risk, making sure that we, add some intellectual property and bring this movement into our economy. And to bring movement in the economy, of course, you would want to make sure that you minimize your risk, and any situation that creates an unnecessary aura of things might go wrong, not because of a shortage of labor, not because of a shortage of capital, not because of those factors, but more so because of us not creating a stable atmosphere where decisions could be made. I think that is a cause for concern, and these are the things we need to bring to the forefront, because as businesses, we all make our decisions on what is the environment in which we operate.
Okay, I'm glad that we ended with you, Vishnu, because I want to bring to light, as a point of discussion, what I believe to be, there have been two contrasting perspectives with regard to the private sector's direct intervention in what is going on currently. Within the past week, we've had two very different methods of intervening from two different private sector bodies. I believe you were a member of one of them, an executive member of one of them. The Private Sector Commission, earlier this week, I believe, or late last week, addressed a letter to the CEO of GCOM through Mr. Jerry Levaya, expressing its position, as it were, on the state of the preparations for preparedness for elections, etc., and particularly part taken by GCOM CEO Mr. Lowenfield. Then you had the GCCI issuing a general release with regard to essentially the same issues, without addressing Mr. Lowenfield. Now, with regard to the reticence versus the obligation for intervention by the private sector, which would be the preferred path? As far as intervention as the PSC made, or as restrained or indirect an intervention as the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and Industry made? We can start with because remember, I believe that you are an executive and you've been a past president of the GCCI.
Yeah, I'm a past president of the GCCI.
And then the other panelists could.
Not the current executive, although we are all informed of what is happening, and we've gotten to a stage where it's now nearly 7 months, past 7 months of where a certain decision was made. Well, the no confidence motion was passed. Our interpretation of the actions to be taken were as clear as they were on the evening by those involved. And having gone through the past 7 months of various interpretations coming to light and us waiting for a resolution, I understand the anxiety within the private sector in order to get things moving along, because what happens as well is that we do contribute a significant amount of taxes to the system, and taxes come from profits. The less revenue we generate, the less taxes, and also it could also have an impact on labor, because if we're not doing business, one of the areas where we start cutting, sometimes unfortunately so, is on the labor side of things. And
I understand I understand the anxiety in general, Vishnu.
Yeah.
The question is, in terms of the creating this space for discussion, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You had two very different interventions by the private sector.
Yes.
Direct address to Lowenfield by the Private Sector Commission, and then you had the indirect appeal to the major players by the GCCI.
Those are just two strategies, and we are at the point right now, and I would speak for myself as a private sector individual participating in this program here as well.
Yeah.
How do we get the message across? We've used indirect methods, as you have described from the GCCI. the impact, and this is probably now the 6th release in 7 months, or the 6th discussion about this in 7 months from the private sector. And I'm not sure this is the, how much, but all different strategies based on the interpretation from the private sector to move things to conclusion. What will be the next step? Maybe you'll see us, also moving to the streets to get some resolution. And for the private sector, it really doesn't.
That'd be interesting to see.
Very, very interesting to see. But we need some amount of resolution in order to move things along. And again, the private sector will be here under whoever is in government. It's not as if the private sector is going to disappear if either party or a new party actually leads this country. But for us, it is, let's follow our laws, let's follow the rules and get to a point of resolution so that life can continue and we can actually prepare ourselves. Because while all of this is going on, a lot of opportunities are bypassing Guyanese companies, and a lot of the preparation that we're supposed to be doing is not being done currently.
Okay. Lincoln, a labor perspective on the two different private sector interventions in the past week. And I'm presuming that you've been familiar with both of them.
Let me say to you from the outset that one of the things that we fail to take note of, that the Private Sector Commission advances the political interests of the business community. Same way as how the TUC that I work with, I happen to be the General Secretary, we advance the political interests of the unions that fall within the umbrella organization. But what we're talking about tonight is the question of the issue about finding common ground.
Yeah.
It's important. I believe that we can only find common ground if we are guided by universally acceptable principles, the Constitution and the laws.
Yeah.
In the current scheme of things is that we may have our opinion about what has been transpiring over a period of time from December to now. And we have our opinion also about what the court may have not only adjudicated on, but the decisions of the court, right? Yeah. Let me say to you that from labor perspective, how we see it in the sense that, look, the Constitution, laws, and the decision of the court, they're all dead unless they are properly activated by the people. Yeah. It requires the two foremost political leaders in this country, Mr. Granger and Mr. Jackson, to sit together, listen to the vibes that are coming from the society, and start the process of engagement. When I talk about Article 13 of the Constitution, which speaks about inclusionary democracy, I always say that we need to put meat to it, we need to make it real. Both sides, when the PPP was in power, and you talk about Article 30 of the Constitution, in fact, a period of time when they were in opposition, they tell you this is the worst constitution you've had. When they came to power, they tell you that what they are doing is consistent with the Constitution. We have had some amendments.
Those are not necessarily contradictory positions.
Huh?
You could have a worst constitution possible, but you could be sticking with that worst constitution possible. So yeah, those are not necessarily contradictory positions.
All right, that's how you see it. But let me make the point to you.
Yeah.
Now, what has happened over the period is that while government, the PVP, we have been calling for the question of the Constitution to be respected.
Yes.
And they have been doing things that are inimical to the interests of the society. When they lost power, they get into opposition, they tell you, they call on the government to respect the Constitution. That's the problem with our politicians. They approach things very self-serving. And what has happened with civil society groups, that we are caught being running down the road with them, with either side, and end up in the rat hole, right? The time has come, and we've been saying it since January of this year.
Yeah.
The TUC has been saying it, that it is an opportunity for us to impose ourselves in the process. But we have engaged a number of agencies, I have seen a number of faces, and what has happened, I have warned against this issue, I've been warning from the outset. Don't talk about calling who must call the election. Let us talk about governance in this country. Because I'll tell you what, election for people in this country is who gain power and who lose power. After election, the issue of governance that impact on the things that Vishnu is talking about, right? People forget them. What we need to do, we need to talk about the inclusionary democracy in this country. And governance must be at the center of our discussion. Tomorrow, I'll tell you what they're going to, right now, as the political parties square off. After election, they will forget all the promises that they have made to people, all the things they say they will do, right? And be gone back to square one. I have grown up in a society, Let me just finish this point. I have grown up in this society.
Then we move on to Trump.
And I have seen a number of things, a number of rampant exploitation. We have seen what Booker's have done. We have seen what Alcan has done, what Reynolds has done. And we see people came after independence and did the same thing. And we're talking about this oil. Let me tell you something. Unless we address this issue of governance, we have nothing to get from it as a people. That's what I want to say.
Great. Well, Troy, Dr. Thomas, let me just link you to what Lincoln just said. In your opinion, what is more important, the general issue of governance from a fundamental perspective, or adhering to the law, the strict interpretation of the law with regard to the imperative to call elections? And are they at conflict with each other?
Could you repeat the first part? The part.
No problem. Lincoln, you could correct me if I misinterpreted you. He focused on people saying that, the question of when and who should call elections, which is something is currently being pushed now. And then there's what he said we should be focusing on is the general issue of how it is that we reform governance from a fundamental level before we get to the question of calling elections. Now, those are both, I think, critically valid perspectives. Which do you weigh more? Is it the imperative to call elections now, or the imperative to look at our fundamental issues of governance? And what Lincoln would have hinted at is the issue of constitutional reform to some degree. I think this is the question. So which for you weighs more?
Let me apologize. I seem to be getting a bit of technical issues.
No problem.
I think that there is indeed on the one hand the issue of governance, and then the issue of what is happening right now. And I think that both are important. But how we address the current issues should be informed by an overarching view as it relates to governance, so that what you're doing on the one hand in relation to the current issues should be consistent with what you want overall for governance. As it relates to the direct, indirect approach, I think both approaches are relevant. They have to be used carefully, however. In the direct approach, where you talk about specific individuals, you must realize that you're putting those specific individuals on the spot, and you must weigh whether or not those individuals ultimately have a responsibility and what are the potential consequences of doing that. Are you encouraging inclusion? Are you encouraging people to welcome you to the table to discuss and see how you might proceed? Or are you alienating them further as a result of the approach that you have taken? At TIGI, our primary business is not to go after specific individuals, but to address the issues in a somewhat, there are sometimes when you need to get specific, especially if we're talking about top politicians. Of course, we will be very specific about them. But we address the issues in such a way that we call on the system to function the way it is supposed to function, and avoid as far as we can calling out who might be, not everybody is a politician. Some people are professionals doing their job, and when you address them in the public in certain ways, it might affect, how the public view them. It might have consequences for them. I want to say that elections in Guyana is really an existential issue. And I know that the private sector has a lot riding on it because they feel like their fortunes fluctuate depending on stability of the environment and perhaps even who might hold the seat of government. So I understand to some extent people getting riled up over the particular issue. The existential nature of elections that I alluded to stems from the relative permanence of party in power in our experience. In my entire lifetime, I've seen the government change twice. I have a little sister, and I have to stop calling her little because she's not, that her entire life until 2015, and at that time she was eligible to vote, she had only known a single government, the PPPC. I say that to put into perspective that what goes on in government can affect generations of people in Guyana. And if you feel excluded, that exclusion is not ending anytime soon. If you feel included, you're going to enjoy what you feel are the benefits for a very long time. It leads to this sort of fighting nature in people as it relates to elections and how it should be done and who is in power and so forth. And we have to put it into perspective. Some people feel like some people are willing to drop everything else. Let's stop talking about governance and figure this out. Who should be doing this? Who should be doing that? I understand it, but civil society, I think, has got to look at the long-term view of how we pull ourselves out of this mode so that regardless of the change in government, we can still continue to talk about governance and not feel like day to day we have to fight tooth and nail to see who is in power and who is controlling this or that or the other.
Okay. No, I'm a big movie fan. And one of the my favorite movies is a movie called Rashomon by this legendary Japanese director Kurosawa. And Rashomon is essentially a movie told by three different perspectives on the same event. Three different people recounting the same event, and in the recounting of that same event, you have three vastly different narratives.
Yeah.
One of the things I found is that in the recent in political environment, I've seen one thing put out there, one bit of information put out there, and you have people repeating that one bit of information with vastly different interpretations. Now, in carving a middle ground, an objective space for public discourse, clearly, I believe that the civil society has a role in objectively put forward an objective reality, as opposed to a sort of Rashomon-like narrative in which there isn't clarity. Now, there are two critical issues that have been debated, and they've been vastly different perspectives depending on your side of the political spectrum you're on. The issue of the status of cabinet is one. Very briefly, could you give a perspective, starting with, and this is a minute each, max, starting with Vishnu, has coming out of both the Constitution and the consequential orders, what is your interpretation of this current status of cabinet? Resigned or not resigned?
My basic reading with CXC English, a CXC grade 1 in English, is that with the language in 106, 107, it says that the cabinet is resigned, and based on the subsequent rulings as well, it kept reinforcing that that is what in fact happened. And so that's where I see it right now. Yeah, and
let me tell you what, I'm a person who's guided by the Constitution, laws, and I believe that the court has its role to play. In the CCJ ruling, they speak to Article 107, 106, right? In that article, what we have had, we have 106 and 107. Many people talk about. When you read what 106 said and 107, I don't want to be caught in it because they're conflicting. 106 says resign, and 107 says that the president shall resign when a new president has been elected. I don't know what they mean, and I don't know. What I believe should happen is that these two big men need to sit down and understand one thing, that we never had no confident motion. There's no protocol that is written to address what must happen after that. They had from December to now to sit down and write it out and come up with a protocol, come up with an agreement how they will proceed. They don't want to proceed in that way. It says, 107 says that you need two-thirds majority of all members of the National Assembly to do certain things. I'm saying that, as it relates to this question here of resigning or continuing, is for those two groups to sit down because of the conflicting, the conflicts that are in 106 and 107.
Yeah.
106, 106,
I speak issue, but from what you said about the two sides getting together, I think part of the premise of this 6-7, now part of this, I think the main thrust of this current program, which is why I read to it, is that we understand that East is East and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. We're looking at the middle ground and how it is that civil society, as non-political actors, can carve out that middle ground. Now, your perspective on the issue of resignation or lack thereof.
I think the way you introduce it, I think the way you introduced it was perfect because it's about to happen now. I respectfully
Thomas, you heard
disagree.
me?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
I'm hearing you.
I was saying that the way you introduced it is perfect because it's about to happen right now. I want to respectfully disagree with Mr. Lewis. When I read it and having looked at what the CCJ says, it seems clear to me. Of course, I can be guided on this that cabinet should resign. And when it says cabinet, including the president, it's talking about the president's role within cabinet as chair of cabinet. So he's not acting any longer as a result of a decision of cabinet. He's acting, if he does, on his executive power. 1067 is there, but the context within which that operates is set out in 1066. That's how I see it. So the government is in place, but it doesn't have cabinet as the decision-making body, and so it has that reduced scope, notwithstanding the government is still in place.
Okay.
Before you move off, Ruel,
Yeah.
before you move off, let me just make a point. Here again, where it comes in. Everyone has their own interpretation. You have two groups that are fighting. How do we get the two groups to work together? That's the issue here. I get my interpretation of the constitutions. I can say what I want to say on what is going on here, the interpretation. But it can only be resolved through dialogue. And how we get this dialogue. That's the issue.
Well, part of that dialogue, I think, is to expand context as much as possible in order to inform interpretation of what is put before you. Now, I can short the rest of the program. I'll avoid giving my, as the moderator, my particular perspective, but perhaps to inform or add to the perspectives given on this issue. This is something I've written about. Articles 99 to 105 establish the executive in a very general sense. It establishes the ministers, prime ministerial position, vice presidents, and then we get to 1066, which is in terms of the amount of text, one of the larger articles. And we started from 99 to 105, 1066, several paragraphs. So think about it's full seven. I think,
seven paragraph in 106.
I think it's seven paragraph. Good. Now 1066 is intended to add another layer of functionality to the executive as established from 99 to 105. It's as if, say you have a house and you were given the keys to this house except for one room. This very special room. 1066 gives you the key to that one room. And that one room has the sort of resources you need to run the houses at optimum effectiveness. However, and this is by virtue of 1066, that key is removed from you. Somebody comes in and takes the key away from you. And this is what a no confidence motion does. You no longer have access to that room. You still run the house. But that room is now off limits to you by virtue of the key being taken away. You then have to know, before the house collapses, because you don't have the resources to upkeep the house from that room, you then have to make another appeal to be able to get access to that room. And that process of appeal is elections. Now, the next issue here is the when of elections. The opposition has put forward the specific date of September 18th. Is September 18th a valid or invalid date in terms of the timeline set out in 1067 going forward? And we can start from Dr. Thomas and work our way back to Dr. Doerga, with Mr. Lewis in the interim.
I think the CCJ, as I recall, was careful to avoid specifying a date because 1067 provides for a political solution of a two-thirds majority of Parliament extending the date. So a date could not be provided by the CCJ. However, the Constitution does tell us that election should happen within 90 days. So there's a reasonable expectation should happen within that period. I agree that the leaders can sort that out and apply a parliamentary solution to it. But if the Constitution, I think, anticipates that certain things should happen and then the line by which it should happen. Other issues involving GCOM and its readiness and so forth. But if we discount that for the moment, it should be within 90 days of passage. And I think that would have gotten reset from the pronouncement by the CCJ, because prior to that, the last judgment we had said that the motion was not validly passed. So if September 18 is in fact 90 days from the first judgment of the CCJ judgment, that election would occur within that time frame. Yeah.
All right. At this point in time, let me just encourage listeners that your support for this sort of programming is critical. So I'm encouraging you to like, follow, and share the Facebook page and subscribe to the YouTube channel that this program is being broadcast on. Mr. Lewis, September 18th.
Let me say to you, I started by making the point from the outset that while there are laws, constitution, it has to be activated by people. This constitution was made for lawyers. It was made for the society, right? And we have to, anything that we do, that's why we have the political leaders, we elect them and we expect them to be guided by the Constitution. But it is the spirit that is embodied in the Constitution that they will have to address. Mm-hmm. The CCJ spoke specifically about 106. You understand me? They asked the leaders, they imposed some responsibility to the leaders for them to sit down and talk. They must be guided by that, by 106. These guys have to speak. If we are going to find common ground, we can't find common ground going into the court. We're fighting in the court. The court will give you guidance. What we have to do is to make sure with one voice, we seek to have these guys widen the discussions. I've said about it and I've written about it before, right? If you're going to be talking just about election and the appointment of a chairman, you're going to be polarizing the society. What is required of us is to throw in issues of governance into this discussion. At the end of time, you must not be winners and losers. What you ought to have is winners and the society win, because everybody will feel at the end of time that they have a stake in what is taking place. Talking about 18th or 19th or which date for election, what you're doing is polarizing the society further. You don't set these deadlines. They don't put these things are not, behaviors are not written in stone, right? Governance is not written in stone.
Well, let me put it to you that the very premise by which we say we observe a very specific thing, Article 13, and the very premise by which we establish the roles of the president and the opposition leader and their specific sanctions and the authority from which they speak, aren't those written in the law and are those legally circumscribed?
let me say to you, yes, you get things written in the Constitution, but what has happened is that the laws that need to flow from the Constitution. For instance, you mentioned Article 13. You have had the general statement and intent of it, but there has been, since it has been put into law, into the Constitution, was in 1999, right? Nothing has been done to put structures in place for making such things real. Those are the things I'm talking about. Let us understand, like you're talking today about oil and gas, the local content for oil and gas. It is framed and it remains among a specific group in society. Why cannot be widened, the discussion be widened, and that local content is taken by the president and the leader of the opposition, agreeing to it and take it to the National Assembly and make it law. And this is what we're going to be working on. These are the type of things I'm talking about. Because tomorrow, whosoever, when we finish arguing about the chairmanship of the commission, we have elections, we polarize this society. When the elections come to an end and whosoever win, we've gone back to the same situation where whosoever win will be using the resources of the people of this country for their friends, colleagues, and cliques. That's what we have to stop. And that's the reason why I argue that the issue of governance is more important. I'm not saying that the question of election is not important. Election is the means to get your hands on the power, on political power, for some people. But election must be seen wider than that. That it is something that to put a mechanism in place to benefit society in general.
Dr. Doerga, September 18th, your perspective on September 18th. What guides it? And was it,
My perspective on this is that we need to be a society that operates by the laws that we've set for ourselves. One of the key things that continues to happen is that there's no precedent being set, and this precedent will come to haunt Guyana in the future. When situations like this happen again, it might not happen in 5 years, 10 years, it can happen in another 50 years again, and now there's precedent set. The message it also sends to our society of not following the rules. What if I commit an offense now, or I don't follow the law? Do I now have it in my right not to obey the judgment of the court, right? Because if my leaders can do so, why can't I? And that is some big cause for concern. And to also look at how the Constitution is really, people lobby against the Constitution. We want constitutional reform, especially when we're not in government. And as soon as we're in government, we continue to use that same Constitution to make sure that we stay secure in governance. And, that is a catch-22 where civil society does have to strengthen itself. And, for the history of Guyana, it was never really in the favor of any ruling party to have a strong civil society, because when civil society gets too strong, they lose power, and they're very fearful of that. And, so this is something where we can't really depend on the government to help us as a civil society develop our voice. We do need to collaborate, and it's going to be a really good mirror held up to us. If we want our leaders to collaborate, if we want the president and the opposition leader to collaborate, will the heads of civil society, and I don't know there's a movement in the background going on to get the grouping of civil society leaders and organizations together, but I also know how much those egos are butting heads. And maybe this is not just limited to the leaders in our country, to the president and the opposition leader. Maybe it's also when it comes to our civil society leaders. And, where do we start? Do we start saying, well, labor will go and sit with the private sector, or who needs to reach out their hand first? And again, this is playing out in a microcosm all over this country, where people might be waiting on each other to actually take that first step to do what is right. If we expect it from our leaders, maybe we learned this behavior from our leaders. That's why we behave the same way. And, the word ego, it's like edging God out. Some of us, we do think that we're mightier than God, and what we say has to go. And as long as we remain in that particular mindset, it's going to be very tough to get to that reconciliation that Mr. Lewis is talking about, to really sit down and discuss and do what is right for the country, more than just following the laws, even if these laws don't serve us. So that's my opinion on it. In terms of a time, from a private sector perspective, as soon as possible, because whereas we as Guyanese are sitting down pondering what our governance is going to be like, many foreign companies have seen this in other countries, have seen this in many places in which they've operated, and they're willing to risk a few $1 million just setting themselves up and making sure that they are ready to serve the market, whilst we sit in this quandary of when will this return to normalcy. So I do think that if it starts, maybe we might not just have to wait on our leaders. Maybe we as civil society really need to also step up our game.
Which brings me to the question of why have we not seen sort of a unified umbrella effort from civil society? Because Lincoln, you would notice, I think Vishnu as well, definitely. Early in the year, when this issue first appeared, there was a specific move to establish a civil society forum. That has not progressed as far as I know. In fact, if I'm guessing correctly, it might have regressed somewhat. Why is that? Why is there no umbrella civil society forum that can put forward a consensus on what is taking place currently?
At least for the 19 years that I've been involved in private sector development, and I've had to reach out to many organizations. There have been several starts, but what I noticed happened from time to time again comes back to leadership within the organizations as well. Sometimes even in the private sector, where one entity feels like they're not represented and then wants to make a bit more noise and then withdraws from the process. And I've seen it in the other entities as well. Maybe we need to move to the Chinese system where, on a very village individual level, they first select someone to represent them, then that group of representatives selects the next level, more than the manner in which we do it currently, because maybe we are not as representative as we should be of the wider society. And if we're not as representative as we should be of the wider society, it's very tough for them to support us when we need their support, when we need to put our foot down and say, no, this is the way we need to go in order to have a better life for all. So, it's some fundamental issues, but these issues have their origin from, decades ago, when a lot of the ways in which we could have segmented and divided, and this, ruling and dividing, divide and conquering these our people are still with us. We still use racial lines, we still use class lines, we still use occupational lines to separate and segment us and pull us apart, so that we can be focused on fighting some battle over here whilst the rest gets channeled elsewhere. So,
Dr. Thomas, is that an accurate description of what's going on in terms of the failures of civil society?
Just back up a bit before I answer that, I want to say that it isn't inherently divisive to talk about elements of the law, what is clear and what is not clear, and what might be expected. My approach to this whole thing, and I said it on a previous program, is that we have, as citizens, have to be able to tell the leaders we support, especially when they're doing things that we don't agree with. And so it shouldn't be a case of the people on the other side telling the other side what is right or what is wrong. The people on the right side or on the wrong side should be able to tell the people right there on that side what their view of the issues are. And that's my approach to it. I encourage people who support APNU, AFC, if you feel that something is happening that shouldn't be happening or is not consistent with the law, tell your leaders, let them know. We should not shy away from that, notwithstanding that fact of what I believe and how I approach it. I do believe we have a role to play in bringing people together, and we have to look for ways to do that. Civil society, I think, as far as I'm aware, has largely, I think, a trust issue that is not different from the low trust that is prevalent in society at large. If you look at the lap-up survey over the years, you see that trust is quite low. The level of trust on average is quite low. We have this issue of civil society organizations appearing to be aligned with political parties. One of my colleagues mentioned that earlier. It might have been Lincoln. And so when it comes to creating a grouping of civil society organizations, issues need to be sorted out. I can speak about now. I know there are people who have been in civil society much longer than I have been, and they might have their experience. But at this juncture, I think what we are trying to sort out is our rules of engagement. In fact, even the priorities that we should be focused on, I think it's perhaps wrong or not optimal for civil society to come together to deal with the current issue that we have at hand. Because you need a background against which you're going to deal with this issue. And civil society as a collective has not really set up an articulated a vision and a set of goals and a set of procedures by which it will operate. I can tell you that the grouping is in the process of doing that. One of the things it realized is that we have this trust issue. How do we deal with that? And I think...
Sorry. Just to interject here and to clarify, you said there's currently a grouping that is... Sorry, there's currently a grouping that is looking to have a unified civil society position on issues?
Not position on issues, but to form a civil society group of the sort that we might be contemplating. This is the civil society forum.
Sorry, we seem to be having some technical issues. I'm not hearing you. Just...
That issue might be at my end. Forgive me. I'm not quite sure what it is.
But this was a forum that was...
This
was a forum that was started
there was a...
early this year. Yeah.
Yes, it was this year, earlier this year. And I know that the grouping is in the process of articulating its vision and goals and so forth, because I think that's very important for guiding how it will proceed. And I agree with Lincoln on this, that the group should be looking at how it addresses governance in the long run, or how does it achieve the permanent updates to governance in the country. I don't think that, given that the group has started sometime earlier this year, that it really has as strong a footing as it might need to address the current issues authoritatively, though it can, but you might find issues emerging. I think we have to step back and work on ourselves before we can go forward and do that confidently. And this is against the backdrop of such a grouping not having existed in civil society for a long while.
But aren't you missing opportunities? Because I had to read this afternoon that in wake of the what is termed misinformation, and I could read the initial part of it. This is from the Supreme Court of the Judicature, Protocol and Communications Unit, Georgetown, Guyana, July 24, 2019. And the first paragraph reads, Honorable Justice Roxanne George, Chief Justice Acting, has noted that there is some misinformation that has been carried in the news by different sections of media with reference to the fixed date application filed by Christopher Ram versus the Chief Elections Officer of the National Commission of National Registration, Guyana Elections Commission, and the Attorney General, which was heard on Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019, which is already this week. or the contention by the Supreme Court, and specifically the Chief Justice, is that there has been misinformation being put out there with regard to a specific case, which is the injunction that has been filed by Mr. Ram, Christopher Ram, against GCOM going forward on the house-to-house registration issue. Interestingly enough, with regard to another question I posed earlier with regard to the date, as an aside, I should say this at point 4 reads, Honorable Chief Justice acting stated that the consequential orders of the Caribbean Court of Justice indicate that elections be held September 18, 2019, or such long a period as the National Assembly determines. Now, the time that civil society, and this is specifically via the forum, which I believe is the only current active gathering, as it were, the forum as presently constituted, isn't there a missed opportunity for the forum to take leadership on certain issues and take public positions in certain issues, even as it is currently coalescing for the long term? Are there missed opportunities that happen, particularly at this critical time?
Is that directed to me or Lincoln?
Sorry, to you, yeah. To you, in continuation of who you see.
Yes, while I understand the importance and the urgency of the current issues, what worries me is that the group itself came together in the midst of these issues. And given that it needs, I think, to sort out itself, probably use this as a driving force for us to realize we need to be a stronger civil society. But the group has tried to put out views on current affairs, and there were some issues that emerged with that. And what it highlighted is that we had not sorted out our internal processes well enough. So it does feel, on the one hand, like a missed opportunity, but it's the cautious side of me is saying there might be greater value for this group later, so that if we proceed as we have been proceeding and those issues continue to pop up, we might in the process damage our own credibility prematurely. And so that's the part, that's a little bit of caution that I want to exercise on that. Of course, I think the individual organizations still have, because they've been around for a while, they can still do things on their own. Unless we can get really broad group consensus and ensure that we wouldn't have the kind of thing that happened when we were trying to put stuff out, I think the group should proceed a little bit more cautiously and understand that we have to work on our structure and our systems before we can start addressing the public. I know that sounds unsatisfactory, but I want the group to survive beyond this and to deliver benefits to Guyana beyond the current issues. I'm not downplaying the importance of the current issues, but I think that group has potential for the future.
I'm glad Mr. Lewis has joined us back just in time. I think he had some technical issues. I'm going to sum up the question I asked Dr. Thomas, and then I'm going to put it to you specifically, perhaps missed opportunity for civil society. Now, I asked Dr. Thomas is whether, even as the civil society forum is coalescing, as it were, and giving itself structure, if there are not missed opportunities with regard to pronouncing on specific issues and providing the sort of guidance that civil society should provide. Now, when this program began, you give a bit of a historical perspective on how civil society action preceded the establishment of what we call native politics in Ghana. So there was the BGLU before there was the original PDP. And you said that this is Mr. Lewis, you said that civil society, particularly the labor movement, sort of seeded ceded ground to the political actors in the leading up to the independence. Aren't we in the same space currently right now where civil society, by its very reticence, continues to cede ground to the political actors?
Ruel, let me just say to you, I don't want to go in the entire process, but what Troy is talking about, I know from the first day what the intent was. And the failure of civil society had a glorious opportunity at this point in time to impose itself in it. What we did, the group was warned against the question of embracing issues that can create a wedge in society. Let me give you the first one that happened. Civil society, the current group asked to meet with the political leaders. And they were warned, don't pronounce on these issues publicly. Go behind closed door and discuss with the political leaders. Where the letters were written, and the first letter, the first response came from the leader of the opposition. They met with the leader of the opposition. And then the president was in and out with his illness and what have you. And they were once a wait on this man until there was a meeting, and some people railroaded it, and they came out with a statement attacking the president. While they were coming out with this statement, the letter accepting to meet with civil society and the statement passed each other on the way. So what we did was to close the door to talk with the government, right? They were warned against it. Because there are some people in this society who believe that in this case here, the wedge issues, we must embrace them and we must attack some people. I believe that as a civil society, it has a greater role to play than the trade union movement by itself. We can go there, we can talk, but when we are coming from different perspectives and groups of different cultures, we need to make sure that we move across the aisle and find common.
I guess, and
you're about to say something.
Yeah, I want to from what you said, and I want to sort of bounce off from what you said in terms of making sure that you meet both sides. And I will direct this question to Dr. Doerga. Isn't the case that very often what we say to be the middle ground is a place that doesn't necessarily exist equidistant between two positions? It may be very well that at different points in time, one actor from one extreme of the divide is closer to rational behavior than the other. And so we should meet them at that point. And on another time, the other actor is closer to the rational middle ground, closer to rational than the other one. And so that should be the point. It's not necessarily there's a fixed equidistant point that we should meet. We have to account for political irrationality, particularly in this environment. How do you account for that and still keep the perspective or the perception that you were an objective arbiter in the process? Dr. Doerga?
So in an ideal world, what you just described would have been an ideal solution. The most rational position is where we would end up. However, in a situation like this, where we have a lot of self-interest at play, it might be very tough to, apologies for that, sitting on a construction site, but it would be very tough when you have that level of self-interest at play for people to let go of their strongly held positions, however irrational it may be. And, unless we and what also hampers our development is that, there are some people who do have really good rational points, but they are not able to articulate them very well. And in many cases, the battle is won, the negotiation is won by those who can best articulate their positions, however wrong they may be as well. So until we get to a point that maybe, the development of maybe even politicians and our civil society leaders, so that they can really become good articulators of what they want to say, of what their constituents want to be demonstrated, so that you can have positions that can be then weighed so that
Okay. Now, I didn't realize the time had flown so quickly. I think this has been a very stimulating discussion, but very quickly we seem to have run out of the hour and a half that we've been allotted. So what I'd like to do is give each of you, starting with Dr. Thomas, then going to Dr. Vishnu and Lincoln. I will, out of recognition of your seniority issues, comments for you. But my final question is this, before we wrap up. What is the way forward when it comes to civil society's engagement in the present issues? Dr. Thomas?
In the present issue?
In the present environment.
In the present environment.
What are the specific next steps? And you can speak from the position of the policy forum as well.
I think civil society should make good on what it started, which is to form a coalition that can speak with one voice and that engage projects, activities that are of interest to all of civil society and that will bring benefits to the country as a whole. I think that's the future for civil society. We've been fragmented for a long time. However, in doing so, in order to do so, it does require some attention to setting up the organization, setting up the rules of engagement, make sure you have a vision and goals and so forth, and sifting out those issues that are common to all of us. Whenever you have a diverse group together, it's good for learning from each other. But the things that you can really proceed on collectively will be the things that everybody values. And civil society needs to sort out what those things are and then develop a collective movement around those elements. There might be interesting things that pop up along the way. Individual organizations, I think, can continue to address those. And I think we have to start resisting the urge to put each other on the spot to say, you are not addressing this, what is happening here, or you should be saying this, or you should be saying, let's stop doing that. Allow organizations and even a coalition to decide what its path should be. And you may not understand it. You may not understand what the goals of the organization are, but allow that to unfold. And so I think the future for civil society is in a strong coalition, but it has to be set up properly.
Dr. Doerga?
I think there's definitely, so I think the next steps forward, having been in this for a while, I think it will depend on having a more structured approach. One of the biggest issues in civil society movements is that the participants, the leaders, those who really put their shoulders to the wheel, in many cases, these are volunteers. They're not being financially rewarded for the work that they're doing, which means that most likely they have something else, their career, their job, and etc., that takes a higher priority than their civil society work. Coupled to that, our income levels in Guyana, private sector or on the labor side, are nowhere where we would like them to be, that give us sufficient disposable income to maybe even take some time off to maybe focus on our civil society work, maybe contribute more financially as well. That would allow us to bring in the level of competent professionals that can take their 8 hours a day and research a specific topic and then present it to maybe the spokesperson of the civil society organization. People like myself, and I'm not 100% sure about Troy and Ms. Lewis, if they are being rewarded for their civil society activism in a financial way, or if they are taking their own time off from their career, from their job, from their other responsibilities, to pursue the needs and the objectives of civil society organizations. I think the blessing that Guyana will have, and hopefully we don't turn this blessing into a curse, is that in a relatively short term, we will have access to a higher level of income flow that this country will receive, which, if things are really structured well, will reach the pockets of almost everyone in this country. And that will give us the revenues and the resources that will be needed to build our civil society movements. As civil society, we don't receive subventions. It would be almost wrong for any one of our organizations to receive a subvention from the government or any other foreign entity or any other organization, because then we might have to sing to their tune. So we do need to be able to raise our own income, doing our own funding, and so that we can remain objective, and we can remain focused on what the people that have put us in these positions require us to say on their behalf. So I think those are some of the next steps. The good thing is that most likely the income problem, if we play it right, will be solved in a matter of years. It then, begs the question: can we then attract more and more people into the civil society movements that will have the time, energy, and money to contribute to the objectives of these organizations?
Let me just, before I move on to Lincoln, as a final thing, let me just suggest that perhaps statutory funding under the premise of Article 30 might be a way forward. Lincoln?
Let me say to you that there are wars in the Middle East for a number of years. But while those wars are taking place, there are people sitting in Europe or in New York talking about they will bring them to an end. What we require here is the deepening of dialogue among us. And when I talk about, I'm talking about genuine dialogue that are guided by a protocol of principles, not dialogue where a political party may engineer somebody to come in to talk about something or to push up a certain line. I'm talking about dialogue guided by a protocol of principles. We must understand clearly what the objectives are in those principles. Unless we do those type of things, we are going to be spinning top in the mud. We cannot, as a group, call ourselves credible brokers to be publicly taking sides on issues or even publicly pronouncing on issues. What we need to do is the effectiveness of a group like the civil society group is how much we can do behind closed doors. Because you have to remember that the people you're dealing with, they have their own egos. And we have plenty of egos in this society. We have to, I believe that we can succeed. We have people among us who can well work with groups to bring them closer. They may be polarized, but you put things on the table. As a person who is involved in dealing with conflicts over the years, there are times today, when you're talking, you may have a serious matter with a company. You may be miles away today, but tonight you sit down and you have a drink and somebody says something, and that may be the point of bringing the parties together. Dialogue is necessary. We can talk about our opinion, we can pose our opinion into what is taking place now, who is right and who is wrong. It is just an opinion. And those opinions, either one side says it's good or the other side says bad. What you have to do is make sure that you get in the room and see how much conciliatory work you can do with the parties. I will suggest civil society has a role to play. And that role, Article 13 as enshrined in the Constitution, will not be realized by politicians giving you something. You have to impose yourself in the process. And this is the opportunity that we have. Both sides need us at this time. We have to do what is right on behalf of the people of this country. Thank you.
All right. Well, gentlemen, and let me just endorse, I guess, what the general sentiment is here. Years ago, I read a book on Albert Camus, and what's one of the lines that struck for me, one of the sentiments that stood out and has remained with me through the years, it is about for the past 20 years or so, is, and in keeping with what Lincoln said, he wrote to a guy called Kisu, and he said that whatever happens, it's important that we keep a conversation going. The conversation is necessary to prevent a further descent into conflict. I certainly believe that the civil society's role in creating that, in sustaining that conversation is a middle ground that needs to be established in this maelstrom of political strife that which we're heading in and which is going to increase. I guarantee you as the days move ahead. So, gentlemen, thank you for appearing on the show. I want to thank Globespan for allowing me the privilege of hosting this and moderating this event. And let me finally encourage you again to support Globespan by logging on to the Facebook page, liking it, and subscribing to the YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, and to our listeners, good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.